that down.
I just filled that.
To set this up for, briefly, so the board's has fiscal 16 on the budget tonight. Among the things to discuss are the state of the school budget, the recommendation plan to balance the budget from town administration, expenditure, and revenue summary, budget gap elimination scenarios. I think while the school budget's first, it might be helpful to take this context for where we stand right now. So,
Yes.
Ms. White, do you have anything you want to add to?
No, I don't.
That very
I've reviewed
summary.
Mr. Town's presentation, and it's very comprehensive, so I don't
Okay.
know that any introductory remarks are needed.
Great, okay, thank you. Mr. Town.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeff Town, Deputy Town Administrator and Finance Director. This has been one of the toughest budget seasons I've been through in my career. I've had one other that was really, really difficult where we had to do a lot of layoffs during the 08-09 timeframe. But this probably ranks up there in the top three. Reason being is that, you know, everybody thinks that Natick is a rich community. Everybody thinks that Natick has plenty of money. But we have issues that we all have to deal with, and especially when you're looking at both the town and the school budget. The fiscal year 16 budget that will be presented to you shortly via the general fund revenue and expenses summary version number, I have no idea at this point. But it's dated 3/23 is balanced. The town administrator, the superintendent, the school committee, and all the parents of the students in Natick Public School, I think, have done a great job outlining the need for additional staffing due to increased enrollments of past, present, and future years. Both the town and the school budgets have contractually required increases that must be included in the fiscal year 16 budget, such as wages, health insurance, payments, pensions, special education expenses, and other. We've been working very closely, the town and the school administrations, you, the board, the school committee, the finance committee, to try to provide the best possible budget considering the fiscal constraints that are imposed by Proposition 2.5, limitations on local and state revenues, and, as I just mentioned, the contractual obligations that we face. There are a number of small discretionary items within this budget, items such as program improvement requests that we've talked, those are still in the budget, the fire department radios, the sanitarian, and the DPW department assistant. Collective bargaining agreement funds available, so when collective bargaining takes place, that there are funds available to settle those contracts, and non-union wage increases are also within the operating budget, as well as discretionary capital expenditures, which are all funded by the Capital Stabilization Fund. No increases or collective bargaining agreements have been negotiated or decided upon at this time. However, the administration believes that it's essential to have resources available to bargain in good faith with the 400-plus town employees who I believe put in a very hard day's work every day and accomplish incredible work for the town. The school department also has salary increases included in their budget, and the town feels that parity is important. I'm going to go through the PowerPoint presentation in a moment that outlines the budget and how it's been balanced, but I thought I would start first by what you're familiar seeing, which is the... You all set, Mr. Brown? Okay. That outlines the general fund revenues, summary of revenues and expenditures, which is on the board behind you now. There we go.
Behind the board.
Behind the board. You tasked the administration last week with giving you a recommendation on how to balance this budget. Last week, as you recall, we had about a little over $1 million in unbalanced budget. If you see in the column that has most of the yellow highlights and you look to the bottom, there's no excess or deficiency in the budget now. What we've presented to you tonight is a balanced budget, and the items that have been affected are many. I'm going to start with the expenditure side because I think that's the easiest to define. Public Works, we added the PIR for the for the departmental assistant, administrative assistant. That's outlined on the PIR form. Portion of wages increased here. Health and Human Services, that's where the Board of Health budget shows, and that is also the PIR associated with the half-year implementation of the sanitation. Sanitarian employee. Admin support services is where the legal budget is. I'm going to get into that in a moment, but I have a proposal that would establish a revolving fund for tax title collections and expenditures associated with that, which has been authorized by state law just this past year, which allows us to put all the monies collected for advertising, notification fees, any type of recording fees in a stabilization fund so that it doesn't impact the operating budget. And the fringe benefits have been affected by the 2 PIRs, changes to the school department, number of staff, and also yeah, that's it for that account. The reserve fund, I did some study in the reserve fund. We've had $300,000. We used to have $400 at one point. We dropped it down to $300 the last several years. We haven't spent more than $250,000 with the exception of the one time in which we did the Pond Street retaining wall. I think it was last year or the year before. Out of the last 8 years that I did the research on, we've only come close to spending a little over $200,000 twice. One for the Pond Street retaining wall that took the whole amount of $258 that we used that year, and another one had a significant amount of money that we used for fire department overtime. I think it was $140,000 out of $213 that year. Other than that, we haven't spent nearly close to $200,000. So I've reduced that by $50,000 to get us to $250. It still leaves us a comfortable margin that I believe that if we had any emergencies over $250, we're going to have to go someplace anyways for some kind of guidance.
We should note that the FinCom hasn't voted that amount.
That's correct. The facilities management line item changed by what you saw last week on the balancing report, where we have not filled the custodial manager's position. So that line item has been adjusted for that. And again, the tax title revenue, as I said before, the funds will, instead of being as part of the operating budget, will be part of the revolving fund. Of course, we have to establish that revolving fund in order for that to take place, which is the only way this funding mechanism will work. With that, the I'm going to go over to the PowerPoint, Mr. Chairman. It's the first time we've presented a balanced recommendation to you as of this season so far. And what it equates to is the numbers that were on the last form, that the general fund operating expenses are increasing by a total of 3.61%, all inclusive, both the school, the town, and the shared expenses. Natick Public School increasing by 4.51%. Keefe Tech School increasing by 14.23%. I want to clarify that because if you recall, this brings us back up to 2 years ago's level. Last year, we had a decline in the number of students, and they had operational savings within their budgets, so it came way down. This is going back up to the 2014 level. So even though it shows a 14.23, we were very thankful last year to have the reduction that they offered us, albeit a one-year reduction. The town budget, including both the libraries, is increasing by 1.65% as a result of this balanced budget. And shared expenses, both for the school and the town, which include your retirement, your employee benefits, facilities, and those types of items, is increasing by 3.7, mainly made up by a majority of that by the fact that we're increasing the health insurance benefits, which show in that line item. The Natick Public Schools for staffing ads in this budget are 8.9. I refer you to the Natick Public Schools agenda item tonight. Under item 2 of the superintendent's reports for the detail, it outlines what those 8.9 positions are, if anybody's interested in seeing that. And the town of Natick is adding 1.5 FTEs, and what I mean by that is the half-year implementation of the sanitarian. That'll be a full FTE starting in 2017. And the DPW administrative assistant is a full-year implementation starting July 1 of 2015, if so approved by this board and approved by town meeting. You asked me, and I think it's appropriate to show the free cash status update and where we stand. The free cash that's available, and again, this is after all of the votes that have already taken place through fall town meeting fall town meeting of 2014 that voted monies out for capital stabilization, general stabilization, the OPEB trust fund, and the like, brought us from the $6+ million free cash that was certified as of July 1, 14, down to this amount that's still available. We always hold in reserve 0.5% of our total operating budget revenues. That equates to about $650,000. And within this budget originally was $1.5 million, and this balanced budget, in order to move forward with everything that's in there, would require $770,597 additional dollars out of free cash. The reason why, as you'll recall, I tried to take a little bit out of stabilization and a little bit out of free cash, it really doesn't make any difference because the amount's going to come out of free cash, whether it's for the operating budget, as I said last week, or the snow and ice deficit. So rather just keep it simple, do this for the operating budget, if you so support the whole budget, and take the rest of the use out of the general stabilization fund in the fall once we've determined what the final number is for the snow and ice deficit, because as you recall, we are legally allowed to carry over a snow and ice deficit as of June 30th and solve it before we do the recap in the fall. And my proposal, I'll get to that in a minute. Here are the PIRs that we talked about. The department assistant for, administrative assistant for the DPW department is $56,672. The fire department radios are $11,000, and the health department sanitarian for a half-year implementation is $32,416. Those are all included within the balanced budget as it sits.
There is a, we still are maintaining our request for the Natick Cultural Center, and but rather than funding it through the budget, we're asking that, given the opportunity that we have with remaining funds in the Community Development Department, that at year's end, we'll ask the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee to do one of those 3% transfers in order to fund that initiative, that ongoing initiative.
Do you have to wait till year's end to do that, to request that?
Yes, yes, we do.
We have to wait till after May 1st.
Mr. Hughes?
So we're going to use essentially money that would fall to free cash to fund something for next year's budget from this year's budget?
Well, they're different than our year, so it still falls within their year. So we're going to appropriate the $82,000 out of this year's fiscal year 15, if, again, you're so inclined to do so, in order to meet the obligation that we've committed to them.
So here's a thought, not to get too into that tonight. If that's not part of the budget, we might want to consider that when we have, as an agenda item, discussions of changes to governance for the cultural district, and try to, at some point in April, resolve all of that together. I mean, if that's acceptable to the board. I mean, I don't know.
The only, Chair,
Go ahead.
I think that's, Ms. White can speak to it as well, but does that create a conflict with the organization not knowing that the funding will be there in that sense as far as budgeting goes?
Well, they wouldn't know until town meeting dissolves anyway.
Anyway. Okay, fine.
So I don't think the town administrator takes that as a given that it will happen. I think that this is still subject to a vote of the board. And the 3% transfer has to be voted by who?
FinCom and Board of Selectmen.
So we'll just have to see. We cannot. But it's not before us in this budget.
Correct.
And if not, it will have to come, if you opt not to, then it could be brought up again as free cash is certified again in the fall.
Okay. Mr. Connolly, question about that?
Not that, but yes.
Sure.
Thanks. So if we get, Mr. Ton, if we get state or federal aid because of the snow and ice,
Yes.
will that go into free cash?
Yes, it will. And that's on the next slide. Thank you for that great transition.
I'm bringing my A game. Could I, at some point, Joe, I'd like to just, if I could, elaborate on, I think you described it as contractual salary increases.
we have it labeled under the Board of Selectmen Town Administrator budget as collective bargaining agreement funding. There's no contracts that have been settled yet. That's why I was trying to be clear in my comments earlier. And there's no non-union personnel that has had any commitments by the town administrator for any increases for next year as well,
Thank you.
at this point in time.
Thank you.
That's a tricky one to word when you say collective bargaining agreements, because people think they've already been settled, but it's just the reserve in case, in order to start the negotiation process.
Thank you.
If we have to, for instance, and this is a if, because we don't know what the final number is, have to fund the full amount of snow and ice, which we do, the $1,350,000 is a rough estimate right now as to what it might be over, above and beyond the $150,000 that we have included in the budget. That's what the ending general stabilization fund will look like. And if, for instance, we do receive any federal or state aid for the fiscal year 15 snowstorms, those expenditures will be treated separately and balanced with the offset of the federal and state revenue, which will reduce our need to draw funds out of the general stabilization fund in the fall at fall town meeting. The status of the capital stabilization fund, just so that people know what we're talking about. Right now we have $4.48 million in the fund. If you and town meeting approve the fiscal 2015 spring annual town meeting and fall annual town meeting capital as designed in the plan that Mr. Schnart's going to present to you later this evening, you will take out $1.544 million out of that fund, and we will also use $635,414 again to keep the debt at the 2012 level for exempt debt through an offset from this fund as well. And then that will leave the balance of June 30th of about $2.3 million in the capital stabilization fund. Again, the $1,544,000 is both spring annual town meeting and fall annual town meeting this year's votes. So it'll be something higher until the fall annual town meeting votes are done. And then once free cash is certified, if you stick with the concept of what we've done in the past and add the local options taxes that have dropped to free cash at year end, back into the capital stabilization fund, we'll add $1.3 million back to this fund with an estimated balance after that is done, ending up after the fall town annual meeting concludes of $3.6 million in the capital stabilization fund. I would also like to show you one other form, which is this one. Try to make this as big as I can. This is where we stood last week. $1,098,135. We reduced the health insurance for $60,000 for the tiered safety nets. Again, the $100,000 is required by contract. We further reduced the health insurance with some of the reserves that we had in there by $98,251, as if eliminating the reserves and again safety nets. We talked about that last week, so there's no change there. We cut the health insurance. There's no change here. That's the same number as I presented last year, $42,000. We reduced workers' compensation and employee fringe. Unfortunately, our workers' comp person that we were paying permanently has passed away. So the portion that would go to her on a bi-weekly basis totals $39,500. So we'll no longer have that in our budget going forward unless something else comes up. So that amount is able to be cut from the budget. And she just passed away within the last couple of weeks. So trying to get all the paperwork done and finalized, we saw an opportunity to utilize those funds as well. Again, we're not funding the custodial manager position for fiscal year 16. It doesn't mean we don't need the position, but we're trying to do the best that we can to balance the budget. Additional free cash to support the operating budget. Again, last week we had approximately $600,000 to $650,000 in the combination between free cash and general stabilization fund. We added the two line items below, taking out the two items that have to deal with tax title expenses of $70,000. Again, we're going to put that in the revolving fund and reducing the reserve fund to $250,000 if that is authorized as well. and adding the town's PIRs, we come to a balanced budget of no gap remaining. And I think, Mr. Chairman, I will just wrap up by saying that this isn't, the ideal circumstances by any means. We still have the structural deficit, as we've all talked about. I've already started working on long-range plans to try to work for that for Wednesday night's at least introduction of that concept. What I think we're going to have to thoroughly analyze. It's by no means a work of art yet, but hopefully by the time we're all done in September, it will be, to address all these needs. This doesn't really help to eliminate or make that situation better. We're still using over 2.2 million of one-time monies in this budget, on top of the money that we'll have to use to cure the snow and ice deficit this year. That being an incredibly exceptional year. But the budget is balanced, and I figured presenting a balanced budget to you would then give you the opportunity to say, yes, I like this, or no, I would rather not do this, and then I will make amendments once again. But I've made these amendments to all the detail just to make sure that everything that happens after you guys say yes or no, I can start finalizing the Finance Committee recommendation book with the motions, because that's a lot of work to do before next Thursday when that is a deadline. So Mr. Everett and I have already started meeting to get that underway, but a lot of this your votes have to take place first, and FinCom's final night of votes is Thursday night, and they have a very packed agenda that night as well, encompassing any of these items that might have changed. And one thing that I did do to try to make that process a little bit simpler on Thursday night is to try to keep the items that we have to talk about Thursday night at a minimum. Again, it's up to you as to what you want to approve to go forward, but this is a balanced budget, and I'm going to switch back to the summary of revenues and expenditures and take any questions you might have.
I've got one quick question before I ask other board members. So the governor last week proposed a new pothole, or winter, pothole fund of, which back in the envelope looked like, almost $100,000 for us. I don't know if that's. $150,000. $150,000. Well, we do not have that in hand, and that would be basically on, would that be allocated similar to Chapter 90, that does not go through town meeting? Is that?
That's
Okay,
correct.
all right, so we would not see that here. Right, okay,
We thank you, Governor Baker.
that's right. All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Hughes, did you?
Have any sense of timing on state or federal aid for the snow and ice?
I don't believe so, not yet.
Bill Shinar, Deputy Town Administrator for Operations. I guess rather than yell from the back room, I'll address this, but the microphone folks at home can actually hear. We're still in the preliminary phases, what they call the discovery phases. We've submitted all of our numbers. They're actually, the state of Massachusetts is, or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is asking the president for a more extended period of time. Typically for snow and ice, it's a 48-hour period where you look at your most expensive 48-hour period during that single storm and you submit that. We're actually looking at 5 storms now, and so we're still in the discovery phases for that. However, the town of Natick has submitted our information to FEMA for that, but it's not likely to hit us during this fiscal year and maybe not even next fiscal year.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions from members of the board? Mr. Mabarney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just talk to Mr. Town for a moment. Mr. Town,
Yes, sir.
I think you're an exceptional person.
Thank you. Likewise.
And I think you did an exceptional job here with your efforts here to balance the budget. I do have to ask you some questions, and if you don't mind, and if you already went over them, obviously, I didn't see it. The schools are already taking money out of the different funds. With, I don't know, whether stabilization funds, they're different stabilization funds, different capital or whatever. That's going to be used, obviously,
Revolving funds.
the revolving funds.
Yeah,
Just for clarification,
in
you
this-
don't mean revolving funds
But
necessarily.
you don't mean stabilization funds.
Don't be,
Right.
no.
There's stabilization fund being used in support, well, actually, stabilization fund, the general stabilization is gonna only be used, am I correct, Jeff, for the snow and ice? Because we're eating up all the free cash to balance the budget, or not all of it, but
I believe what Mr. Mabardi's talking about is the 4 items that they have that are going to be outside of the budget,
Yes.
meaning their athletic funds for fee increases and their circuit breaker funds. Are those the line items you're referring to?
Yes.
Just so everybody, there's no money coming to the schools by a vote of town meeting out of any of the stabilization funds.
That's correct.
and the items that Jeff has named that we believe Mr. Mabardi is referring to are always used in support of the school budget. And they're only available to the schools.
From what fund?
From the
Their own funds.
Their own,
Yeah.
okay.
Their revolving funds and the circuit breaker.
Okay. No, thank you. If I can, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
So if I can just go on, Mr. Town. So what money is coming out of the stabilization funds to fund the deficit?
There aren't any coming out of the stabilization funds to fund this deficit, besides cleaning up the snow and ice deficit that will be on the books as of June 30th of 2015, which we're estimating could be in the range of about $1,350,000.
Okay, so there aren't any other funds being used or that would normally be used to fund the deficit,
Free cash.
free cash?
Yes, there's about $770,597 being used in addition to what we would typically use, 1.5 million. So we're 2.27 million. It's the top yellow highlighted there.
2.2,
Yeah, it's $770,597 more than what we would typically use as an offset to the operating budget. And it's that top yellow line that's right here.
yeah, okay.
And we have used free cash for a number of different things in the past that have been in the operating budget, whether it's one-time one-time items like the McDaniels Family Trust or other items associated like that. So there are a number of different things that you would typically see there.
Okay. And if I can, Mr. Chairman, so these monies, or I don't know if that's even correct English, but the point is, monies taken out of these funds are going to have to be repaid, if that's a word, I don't know, or put back in for next, I mean, it seems like we're just digging a hole here. I don't know if you can.
Let me phrase it this way, and
Okay.
maybe this is what you're referring to. The use of one-time monies is typically not part of our financial management principles. We've always used 1.5 million. It seems like that's been the norm here for quite a while.
Right.
Whenever you use one-time monies, you're at the mercy of those one-time monies being recreated again. And we typically do recreate one-time money because we conservatively estimate our revenues, and we also try to control our spending on the town side as much as possible. So that's what would regenerate free cash. So if I understand you correctly, is saying it's a concern that we're using more one-time monies than we've used in previous years. We should be going the other way at some point in time, and I think that's what the Financial Planning Committee is going to really have to help navigate through. But this has been an exceptionally tough year, especially with the enrollment numbers and the number of contractual increases, especially the health insurance alone. If that health insurance number was what half of what it was, we'd be talking a savings of $750,000. So if that came in at a normal number, 7-8% instead of 14-15%, we'd be not in this situation with having to use another $770,000. We would literally have a balanced budget using our 1.5 million with what we have. Health insurance was literally 1.557 million more than last year's budget due to the increases in the rates this year.
And if I can just ask again, thanks. I'm just wondering how to control spending. Is there, I'm sure you talked about the financial planning committee, but through you and through the town administrator and through the deputy town administrator in charge of operations, somewhere along the line, somebody has to start controlling spending. And
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job at that, if I may interrupt you. I think we've done a pretty good job at controlling spending. The town's portion of the budget is only increased by 1.61% over last year, and that includes all required items of increase. I think that's a fantastic budget. Typically, you know, in a year like this, or in a town, you might see a 2.5% or 3% increase on the town side. 1.61%, I think, is phenomenal. It shows the department head's commitment towards trying to do their very best to keep expenses down. That also includes the conservation methods and the energy-saving methods that Mr. Chenard has so aptly identified in the past of what he was able to do as a Department of Public Works Director, and also in his work now working with the Facilities Department to try to put forward energy savings initiatives, thank you. And Jillian Wilson-Martin, she's doing all of that as well. You've heard from her what she's doing, consolidating as best we can. Are there other areas to explore? Absolutely. But each year, I think the town, I mean, I've only been here for 15 months, but each year I think the town's done a pretty good job at trying to consolidate as much as they can and to work on trying to minimize increases by being creative on how we do things. I just switched, for instance, back to using lockbox for motor vehicle excise permits. And we've processed like 11,000 property tax, motor vehicle excise permits in a short period of time by paying an outside contractor to help us process those payments and take away the burden off the existing staff. I think that's going to help with staffing in the future as we put more towards that. I mean, I think each department is doing the best that they can with that type of approach.
and
If I may, to further answer that, the 1.51, I think you said, Jeff, 1.6.
1.61.
Increase in general government operations this year is actually pretty typical. That's where we are typically every year in terms of our increase. We are facing some real challenges this year with school, and not just this year, but a trend for significant school enrollment growth that, over which we have virtually no control, and healthcare cost increases that every community's facing this year. So, and we continue to explore opportunities there. But I do want to reiterate Mr. Town's point about cost-saving initiatives that we've undertaken in recent years. And I will ask Mr. Chenard to approach the microphone as I outline these. But his initiative for LED lighting for the streetlights saved, if you say it, I'll put it in the microphone. Okay, he's there.
It's between $95,000 and $96,000 a year.
And the bringing
Plus.
recycling in-house?
It's $1,035,000 over 10 years, so about $100,000 a year.
So we continue to explore those kinds of opportunities on an ongoing basis. Are there others I should be highlighting?
There are several things we did with water sewer. I didn't do those alone. I don't want to take exclusive credit for them, but, such as the variable frequency drives. Facilities did a number of lighting initiatives through the schools, the Morse Library with LEDs. I mean, there are a number of projects that we have put forward. And solar.
Yeah.
We're generating huge amounts, not so much this winter, unfortunately, but that's going to be a little bit of a downtrend in our solar generation because of the snowpack. But solar is a huge one, and we're looking, Jillian was here, Ms. Wilson-Martin was here last week, and we're talking about solar at more of the schools.
Additional facilities. So I felt that question really warranted a fairly brief, I hope, but comprehensive response. Your question was, what are we doing to reduce costs? And we're doing a lot on an ongoing basis.
Well, it wasn't so much to reduce cost, if I can, Mr. Chairman. It was to control. But I do appreciate the explanation, because I think people would like to know what efforts are being made to control. I'm not, believe me, I don't see costs being reduced.
Well, we have
But
in many cases.
Well, I'm just saying, controlling it.
And there are other
That's why-
things that I think are important, and I would put the deputy town administrator for finance on the spot to talk about a couple of those. Obviously, he just whispered in my ear, debt being one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I don't mean to put people on the spot, but again, Mr. Chairman, people should know that there are efforts being made. And, I mean, I know a lot of hard work. I'm not saying it just comes, it's happening by itself, but
We have a lot of very positive stories to tell, and it is important to repeat them often.
And I would add that we've refinanced debt. I mean, we've taken advantage of every opportunity that we can. And frankly, I think there's only one small item left that I'm not sure even makes sense to do, but we refinanced some debt from 2004 this past year. And, you know, that saved us, I reported to you, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head right now, but that saved several $100,000 just in interest costs after all of the expense of refinancing the debt. So we as a professional staff are constantly looking for ways to maximize what we have available to support the services that the community is asking for. So I'm thankful for the question, because sometimes we just do. You know, we just go and we do our jobs every day, and we don't get a chance to highlight those. So I appreciate the question, Mr. Mubardi.
thank you. And Mr. Town, again, I appreciate your efforts, Mr. Shenard's efforts, the town administrator, and other people that you talked about, Ms. Gillian, Wilson Martin, all those people that are working here. But I also have to keep in mind that taxpayers should know that there are efforts being made
Sure.
to hopefully control costs so that their taxes don't continually keep going up. And if they do, why? And they need that. Why are we in a crisis? Because I think we are in a crisis. And I'm just my concern, and I appreciate your explanation. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Town.
I would just add to that, I think that we do an extraordinary job of controlling costs that can be controlled, and that we are not always successful, obviously, when it comes to dealing with pension increases. Really, I think that we're paying for mistakes that were made 10 years ago, and that's really unavoidable. So we don't have good choices there. And with health insurance, we're in the same bucket as many other municipalities with ever-increasing costs and limited appetite for to pay those costs, but that's critical to offer our employees that benefit. So, school enrollment, I think that we are a victim of our own success in providing an attractive district for people to move to raise their families and educate their kids. And I guess I don't see a good solution there, but those are the big drivers leading to this deficit and leading to our need to have come to some difficult choices in the years to come about what and how we're going to fund general government and schools. Mr. Marty?
If I can, one more thing, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Town, do we now have a balanced budget?
Only if it's voted.
If it's-
Yes, I mean, it is balanced as it is presented to you this evening.
All right.
Which, go ahead, Mr. Hughes.
This is the proposal, if we go forward, that we, the selectmen, will support in front of the Finance Committee, that we would ask the Finance Committee to support and submit to town meeting, and that we will ask town meeting to vote, and it is balanced.
Correct.
So you have a balanced budget once it's voted by town meeting. Oh, it has to be voted balanced by town meeting, but. Any other questions from board members? Mr. Town, do you want to continue a little bit?
No, I think I've said all that I
Okay.
planned on saying.